I think this is going to be a nice fiery discussion, and we will welcome commentary from the audience. I'm going to let my panelists introduce themselves. Gianluca, let me start with you.
Hi, Wendy. I'm Gianluca D'Antonio. I'm the Chair of Information Security Officer at FCC Group, and based in Spain.
Hi, I am Burim Bivolaku. I am Group Chief Information Security Officer for Noble Group.
Hi, I'm Eduardo Solana. I'm a lecturer of cryptography in the University of Geneva and spend most of my time doing in the academia and the private sector also.
And my name is Marc Lueck. I'm the Director for Global Threat Management at Pearson, the world's largest education company.
Okay, great. Just to give a little bit of background around threat intelligence, one of the things that we all violently agreed on is that nobody has the same definition of threat intelligence. Or we agree that it's been badly misused, especially in the IT security industry. Now, obviously, intelligence itself and analysis has thousands of years of tradition. Finding out intelligence about the enemies, all the different techniques for collecting and analyzing information. Obviously, this has been sped up now in the digital age with much more volume and much more collection of data, but turning that into intelligence, I think everyone agrees, is a very different thing altogether. And we're seeing a lot of confusion, especially in the industry. I think I track about 50 or 60 new threat intelligence vendors or vendors who are saying that they're doing threat intelligence. Now, this could be anything from taking the output of their own product deployments and putting it back into their products to improve their rules or their signatures or whatever. But I don't call that threat intelligence. First of all, that's been going on for years. Many security vendors do that. And secondly, it's recycling their own data. It's not finding out about what the threats are out there necessarily in a way that is useful to the company. But let me turn this over for a quick definition to you gentlemen to talk more about how are we getting threat intelligence wrong right now when we talk about it?
Well, yes, we was talking about it before this panel, that there is a lot of mistake about threat intelligence because many times we think that it's just about technology to analyze, but the analysis, the intelligence is about analysis and is about a process. So it needs human brain to understand the context and to understand the possible impact. So starting from that, threat intelligence is about technology, but above all, about brains that have to process all this information.
It's about intellectual rigor as well. It's about looking at finding statistical significance, being honest with yourself and whoever you're reporting to about how you could be wrong, how you could be misinterpreting the data, what are the chances that that's happening. And we've seen examples of this recently, in the press where someone came out with an agenda and maybe a slightly biased pronouncement, with no real supporting rigor behind it. Burim, what's your opinion on that? Or go ahead.
I think that actually intelligence it's a very. Is that okay? It's a very broad term, and I think that in order people tend to make the mistake about data collection and intelligence, and of course you need to collect data not only from one source of information, from many sources of information, and then you need to, of course, the human brain and the intelligence in order to be able to analyze this information. It might be human intelligence or machine intelligence, but in the end, I think is the taking a broad view and being able to analyze this broad view and broad sources of information.
I would say, in terms of the cyber threat intelligence, I think it's important to basically look at from the point of view how beneficial it is for the organization in terms of pinpointing the risk and the threats that the organization face. So from that perspective, cyber threat intelligence, the one which is relevant, is the one which is relevant to your organization, to your industry, to your sector. Getting generalized feeds about threats, obviously that has been happening for many times by different security vendors, but cyber threat intelligence is the one that actually benefits you, is the one which is specific to your organization.
Yeah.
I think it's important, I don't want to oversimplify it, and a lot of other things may fall into this definition, but threat intelligence is information that allows us to make better decisions quicker. And I think this actually captures both the machine-readable intelligence, because it's allowing machines to make better decisions quicker, but I focus much more on the human side, and that is it's allowing us to make decisions about what's happening in the outside world, what's happening in the inside world, but allows us to understand the context that in which we make these decisions. And that's a very important point to make.
Yeah. Now let's back this up and talk about the difference between threat and risk and vulnerability, because we're using all three of those words in our title, and some people get those confused as well. A vulnerability is a flaw or other opportunity, a weakness in a system. A threat is something that may take advantage of that vulnerability. So it's not the same thing. If you're talking about a vulnerability on its own, it may or may not be exploited. And the discussion on the probability is that of that happening is something that you're going to have with your management. And then the risk is the chance of those things coming together within, and creating a problem. So when we're talking about threat intelligence, we're really talking about not a feed of things that are wrong with your system or, of weaknesses. It's a feed about those actors who would take advantage of those vulnerabilities. And from there, you can use that intelligence to infer the probability of that happening based on what you have and what their motivations are and so on. Does anybody disagree with that?
Based also on the notion of risk, which should be actually the most important argument that one should have in mind. So everything should be risk-based.
Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
I don't disagree with the definition of threat, but unfortunately the problem is if you try to extract threat from those three and say we're going to deal with threat, my own title, threat management, suggests I only look at threats. I don't. And I can't, because I have to be looking at threat as part of the entire attack life cycle, if you will. I have to understand that threat is a component of those three. Those three are a wheel or a line or a journey, whatever the words you want to use, but those three are inseparable and I think can't be pulled apart.
Okay, that's fair enough. Now, what do you think are the largest, most serious threats that the average enterprise has to deal with? Not the threats to the airplanes or, but for anybody in here who has to pay attention to this, what do you think is the most important set of threats they should be worrying about?
Burim?
The classic one is monetizing your IT, monetizing your capability, monetizing your product. In other words, making money off the back of you. Monetizing your IT is the simplest. Adding you to a botnet, and so that they're making money off of what you've already spent. But there are other ones as well. Now this is a category of threat rather than a specific threat, right? It's not talking about vulnerability, how they get there. But I think these are the real common ones that we have to deal with on a regular basis. And I think it's important to look at those common ones because there are ways of dealing with them. There's ways of understanding and managing them. But not knowing they're out there, not categorizing them, not looking at them specifically, you end up just looking to technology to solve these things. And by using intelligence and understanding where and what you should look at and adding the context, you're able to treat them appropriately.
Really, from our point of view, it is not just monetize, but even to understand the capability to disrupt your operation. In our case, for example, it's a big industrial group. Many times the attacks come not just to take money because we have not many transactional process. We are in the utility market. We believe that they are looking for to test their capability to disrupt our operation in terms of then to make a damage, reputational damage, but even we manage several critical infrastructure sector, and so probably even to understand if. And so this is the importance about threat intelligence, to understand who is behind this kind of attacks, what really is the aims of this kind of attacks, just to test capability in terms to be prepared in the future to carry out this in a large scale, or to understand how they are improving their capability and from they are coming.
I think probably the third factor is also reputation. So, and this has been along for a long time. So the risk of losing reputation and is going to probably continue like this in the future. So is one of the factors that is actually attracting hackers or attackers to compromise your reputation. Even your competitor can engage in an attack in order to do so. So.
I think in terms of identifying the key threats and risks that the organization or enterprises face, the best way is to actually analyze the threat landscape and understand the reasons how that threat landscape has changed recently. So you've got threat landscape which is sort of a change in terms of complexity, in terms of volume, as particularly relating to enterprises where before you have specific threat actors going after specific victims. Nowadays, that those boundaries for enterprises are sort of changing, getting blurred, and the enterprises are getting subjected to all kinds of threat actors, and that's where some of the complexities of current threat landscape and the current risk basically come from.
And also a clear picture of your enemies, finally, because this is something that you should. There was a session before that was talking about knowing your enemy, and this is very, very important. So, is it a state? Is it an organization? Is an amateur hacker? Or so I think that this knowledge of your enemies is very, very important. So.
Okay, thank you. Now that we know that.
Talking about denial of service attacks?
Yeah, exactly. Now let me ask you all, how many of you honestly believe that you are under threat from a nation-state actor? Let me see a show of hands. How many of you believe that you are really under attack from the United States or from China or from whoever? Okay, that's a good smattering of people, because you know, that's the sexiest part of the headline, but I'm always interested in finding out whether this is really something that keeps you awake at night. Yes, sir, you had a question. Someone's coming with a microphone. Yeah.
Thank you, Wendy. My name's Dave myself. Question. There's two words together there that are playing on my mind. Actionable, meaning you can do something with it, and intelligence, meaning something you can't talk about, usually. So, have you got an example as a panel of opposite extremes? Obviously, you can't tell us about the thing that you wouldn't be able to action, but I'm minded of the fact that we might have an intercept, might have been given to a national provider. That national provider may have people that are approved to handle it, but the problem becomes, how do you deal with that culture for nation states or individuals or companies that don't get the need to maintain their sources? So at what point does the intelligence become inactionable?
Inactionable, that's a really interesting question. I mean, it's been my own experience that, especially with the federal government in the United States, all the intelligence sharing is pretty one way. You know, they will happily take everything that the private sector gives them and say, thank you very much, but they won't share back again. What about you?
Well, in Spain, we are in the 4th edition of a national-wide cyber exercise of the first stock market. And so really we are trying to establish a two-way relationship and information sharing. This is not very, very easy, because the culture of a government is to collect information and don't share nothing. But on the other end, they are starting to understand that if there is no two-way relationship, then this flow will stop. Okay, so really we are trying to stay all the part involved in the same boat. Okay, so to interchange information, because at the end my company is a critical infrastructure provider, and so we need information, but even we need to share information about what we are detecting in the network, in the internet. Talking about actionable intelligence from company is very difficult to develop this kind of culture, because this culture is it's require a lot of time to understand that intelligence is a process, is not cheap, because collect information is about technology. Right now this is not, in the 20 years ago, all the process was handmade. So you need to collect information with people in the street, in the town, in different group. Right now, we know that the 98% of information flow across internet, open or closed source, okay? So you can collect it with machine, with artificial intelligence. So this layer is easy right now. It's cheaper to collect a huge amount of information, but then you need the second and the third layer that are human brain. Trained human brain to understand the context of your business and to understand the outside context of the geographical, political, and business context, okay? This layer is not cheaper. And you know that if there are not guys available for information security, for intelligence, less. It's very, very, very difficult to find the talent in this case, because it requires a lot of years training to understand languages, culture, political, environment, geostrategical things, and then to match this with your business. So this is a different mindset. And for the company like me, that is a huge group, is very difficult to change the culture inside, that you have to develop this kind of capability. You can buy technology, but then you have to develop this kind of internal capability to understand the context, to anticipate this kind of new threat, okay? So this is, to be actionable, we miss a large, we still miss a long journey to develop this capability.
I think, Marc, you were going to say something?
Well, I was going to object in a productive way to
Yes.
the definition of intelligence is something we don't want to talk about. I think that there is an element of intelligence which is based on, we probably are going to throw a lot of these terms out here, and they're very pretentious, but a lot of intelligence based on tradecraft, on people going and skulking and figuring out stuff. And I get that, but that's not all of intelligence. And we mustn't draw the line and say, well, there are things we don't want to act on or are unactionable because we shouldn't, or because it's beyond us. There's also a lot of intelligence which is freely available information, us inferring, and I love that word, inferring from freely available information and making better decisions. And from a threat intelligence research, monitoring, collection perspective, it's that free intelligence which often provides the greatest, certainly most efficient dividends.
I think that it's not very realistic to expect from the states to provide this actionable intelligence, as you mentioned. So it could be an exception in Spain, I don't know, but it's quite difficult. I think that we really need to gather, the organization need to gather sector-based or even national way. So there are many actionable intelligence that is around, and we just need to organize frameworks for these people to exchange this information. So the same happens with the university, where I'm especially concerned. So security is not a good example of knowledge transfer between the universities and the industry. So I've been teaching for 20 years now. I've been teaching strong authentication protocols for 20 years. Where are these strong authentication protocols I've been teaching for 20 years? So they are 90% of user passwords. So we definitely need to
I think you need to teach faster.
probably need to teach faster, or teach once and not 20 years.
Or teach harder. I don't know, something.
Obviously, there's a need for this knowledge transfer, and I think we are suffering. Now we are suffering from this kind of old problems. So.
Yeah.
There's also, for instance, we were talking before about Heartbleed. So Heartbleed, you all know about it, massive impact, no need to deploy any exploit, easy to detect. It has been there for years. Nobody has detected, nobody has inspected the code, nobody has taught to the programmer how to do a memory check. So, and this was a stupid mistake that cost millions of dollars. And thanks God it went to the right hands before that it went to the wrong hands, because otherwise we would be talking about things maybe we wouldn't be even there. So
We hope.
and
we
how
don't know that.
many heartbleeds, how many shell shocks are around the corner? So we don't know, and we are assuming that we are a mature industry. And this is like a wake-up call. So come on, this is a cure of humility, and a humility lesson that we had from a stupid mistake, and the whole building collapsed.
So when do you think the next Heartbleed is going to come along?
I don't have a clue. I
No?
don't have a clue, but I'm very pessimistic about the Internet of Things, the Internet of everything. So we are making the same mistakes that we made when we were rushing to connect computers to the internet. Now we are rushing to compute these small devices that cannot be patched, that cannot be effectively managed from a security point of view. We are not embedding security as a design. We are just patching security, or we are expecting that we'll be able to patch the security of these devices. And I don't know how the future what the future will bring us. So how many self-driven cars will crash, or how many, I don't know. It's very, very, very difficult, and I'm not optimistic at all.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't state when the next Heartbleed is going to happen, but I can predict with some accuracy that the pace of the next Heartbleed will continue to increase. And it's actually a really tangible, simple use case for an enterprise having a threat intelligence capability, in that, yes, there's going to be a Heartbleed that's going to happen, or there's going to be a shell shock, which I think in some ways was worse. That's going to happen, but with threat intelligence, you're actually able to start to moderate your response based on what's happening rather than what could happen. Being monitoring for what campaigns, is anybody targeting us? Are we under attack? Do any of these incidents that we've been subject to have any relation to whatever this next vulnerability is? Using vulnerability management more smarter, and as I said before and harp on about it, making better decisions about it based on threat intelligence is a real tangible use case.
Now, let me ask you guys, what's the recipe for actionable intelligence? What has to be there? My theory is that it has to be timely, it has to be relevant to you, it has to be specific enough. Are there any elements that I'm missing?
Broad?
Sorry, what was that?
Broad.
Yeah. It has to be broad, or?
I mean, I would say in terms of threat intelligence that the one which needs to be actionable, we need to look at it from the point of view that we, inside our enterprise organization, we build our security controls, secure infrastructure, so we collect information about what's happening within our own organization. So threat intelligence should be about what's happening about us outside of our infrastructure, and what are the threats and risks which are out there outside of our control, which obviously alerts us to take specific action and focus our resources to address those specific risks. And obviously that, in order to happen, that intelligence needs to be specific to the organization itself.
Yeah, and there's a certain amount of context. You'll hear a lot of the word context bandied about in the booths out there, and I have a real problem with it, because I think a lot of people say context when they just mean details. So for example, once in my enterprise, we discovered that we were initiating outbound connections to a server at an IP address, and usually one of these threat intelligence vendors would add the geolocation to that IP for you very helpfully, and say that the IP address is in Romania. And that's not the context to me. What the context is we would say, well, we're a Texas state education agency. We don't do business with Romania. So now it's time to hit the panic button and run around screaming, until we figured out that no, actually, the only place where we could buy a professional Nessus feed was through a VAR in Romania. Long story. So no, actually, we were updating our feed from Romania, and it was perfectly okay. Stand down from red alert. So that sort of context is something that a vendor out here cannot tell you. This is something that you need to put together yourself with the details that are given to you and make the decision one way or another. You guys have an equivalent example that you can talk about?
Yes, we have an equivalent example with some stakeholder, shareholder that come from Japan, and we have no relationship about business with Japan, but they are investors. So we detect this kind of traffic. What are they doing coming from Japan, establishing connection with us? So we drop off the connection. Then we realize when the investor calls that we are Japanese and we need this, some kind of information about your business. So to be actionable, the intelligence have been need to be in relationship with the business. And many times, people that work in information security miss this relationship, with the business. So to understand the context, first understand the business context, then the threat context. Many times there are different layers about business context, cybersecurity context, threat context, that many times are not very, very connected, and so you miss information. And I would like to ask, for example, to the audience, how many of you thinks that threat intelligence really then, the information that we gather with this, the analysis, reach the executive, the board, to take decision or to enrich the understanding to take decision? How many thinks that right now we are in this level of maturity of the intelligence?
Okay, so how many people think that you have threat intelligence today that you can actually use and take to your executive board? Show of hands?
Just two.
Just two, okay.
This is the real problem.
So clearly
this is one of the problem. This is one of the problems that
okay.
we are talking about intelligence, but really then we miss really the relationship between intelligence. We need intelligence to anticipate threats. But these threats are directed to the business. So if executives are not in this circle of information handling, we are doing something that is not valuable.
That was my point about talking about broad sources of information, because actually we are talking about integrating many sources, included business ones. So,
yeah.
I think that's an interesting challenge. Where is your threat intelligence being consumed? And I think it might be a little bit false to say it needs to be consumed at that level, because a well-constructed intelligence program may be preventing those people from even having to make decisions. However, I think it's a valid discussion. And I think there are use cases where, certainly it's a goal of mine to ensure that a valid set of threat assessments are placed in front of senior executives. But also, there are areas where it works now. And M&A is a great example, mergers and acquisitions, finding out about targets before we acquire them, and finding out the kind of information that only the tools and the sets of intelligence gathering that we're talking about up here can provide, gives a whole new spin on an acquisition that has been useful in the past.
I think our friend in the audience has another question.
It goes out as well. There's a company in China that most people will have heard of called Who Are We? And their face worldwide on what's given out is owned by one man. How many of our companies are in a position not to leak and have one man control the intelligence they're providing, presumably, to anyone that wants to short their stock or attack them?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure. I'm sure what your question was.
Really, it's about what intelligence are you all providing, everyone, bearing in mind the alleged experts in the field have one man controlling everything that goes out of their company globally. So security and intelligence, yeah, we're interested in consuming what others are doing, but how many actively police and control what they're leaking?
Oh, I see. Okay, so if you have a relationship with another company where you've agreed to share threat intelligence, the control over what's being shared with you is going through one person. Is that the point that you're making? Yeah, everything. That's a very good point. And the other point is that this sort of threat intelligence sharing is based on trust. And trust tends to happen between individuals rather than between organizations. And for that reason, it can be very ephemeral. So if you're working with one person at another company and you're doing this very unofficially, and then that person leaves, suddenly your intelligence threat sharing, your sharing connection is going to dry up very quickly. And that is, frankly, a danger that I see with some of these vendors who are in the threat intelligence sharing space, because all of their value proposition is in whom they can attract to their sharing platform, how much they can get them to share, that they're not necessarily sharing with, all the other threat intelligence sharing vendors, because they can sign up with more than one, and, how quickly can they decide to take their threat intelligence and go home. So I think that's another thing that companies have to worry about when they're considering signing up for this. Not to mention what your legal department will say if you go to them and say, we want to share intelligence with another company about how we're failing at security. I don't think that's going to happen.
I think that we should establish a clear framework of exchanging information. So it's very difficult to do it in a one-to-one basis. So I think that there should be a clear framework to whether it's the state, whether it's other companies from the same sector. So
I think that is almost utopic, because when you share information, intelligence about threats, you are disclosing to the others what have you detected. But more important than this, what you have not detected to the other. Because if I'm in the counterpart, and I know that what you detect, but I know even what you are not detecting, this is a weakest that you are disclosing. So for me, information sharing about threat is just a close number of person can be in this chain, and this is about trust between even among company, not just people, but among company that know that they are not competitor or are fair competitor within a country, maybe. So it's very, very, for me, easy topic talking about a framework to share information. Share information depending on what you are sharing. This means expose your company to.
We are talking about threats, not about vulnerabilities. So
yes, but threats. When I give you information about threat that I detect, I see, I'm giving information about the threat that I'm not detecting. So this is disclose something that I'm not, my capability don't cover, and so you can use it to exploit.
I think that the environment out there is quite tough, so we should make an effort. There's no way around. So I know that this is the normal mentality of corporation, of organization, and I understand it has been like this for years. But I think that there should be a change in the mindsets, because otherwise the enemies are very well organized. So we were talking before about crime as a service. So this is something that exists, and somebody can go and buy a criminal activity like you buy computer time from Amazon. So it's like this, and it's going to continue to be like this. So the people in front of us, they are very well organized, and we need to do something on our side. This is my opinion, at least.
Yeah, but it's not so easy.
Yeah, I agree. And the other argument for threat intelligence is that, you know, the traditional argument that for a defender, there's a certain asymmetry of information. For example, you only have to mess up once, and the attacker can find it. And so as soon as the attacker knows about a vulnerability, they can address it. But with threat intelligence sharing, that turns the information asymmetry on its head, because once an attacker discloses his methods, and you share that method with everyone else, then it's a case where the attacker only has to mess up once, and then, you know, his technique is going to be foiled going forward. At least that's the idea. So that's, you know, what we could work towards, because then they can't afford to be caught with their attack. So that's another argument for sharing. But you know, you're right. Only something as serious as this would bring competitors together in a place where they would be willing to share that sort of information that in any other circle could, you know, actually be compromising their position or their competitive advantage.
I mean, I agree that sharing of information is really good for the right reason that Gianluca mentioned, but also, as you said, you know, it needs to be within a certain frameworks. So, you know, you've got frameworks organized by or governments, frameworks organized by organizations sort of sharing the same sector. So we have examples of that
I know, for
nowadays.
instance, in Switzerland, Swiss bankers, which are normally known by their privacy and discretion, they are building a team together in order to share the maximum of intelligence, of information to prevent this kind of attacks. So, and we are talking about Swiss bankers that don't have the tradition of sharing.
Professionally, I've got to say I take a very cautious view of sharing, and I think that's the same in many enterprises. Personally, however, I think we've got to get over this, because I have looked at an awful lot of the data that's being shared in these communities, and I think it's a knee-jerk reaction to suggest there's any real competitive advantage in this stuff. It's a reaction to sharing, the principle of sharing, I think, that is causing this molasses-like resistance to the sharing rather than an actual risk that we're mitigating against. So like I said, professionally I follow the rules, but personally I just wish we'd get over it.
Yeah, I would agree. And one more thing to think about, certainly we're seeing a lot of intelligence sharing and advisory councils, ISACs, that are vertical specific, financial services, retail has just been stood up, aviation and healthcare and so on. And that brings these ostensible competitors together to share information. However, in the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report from this year, they made a very interesting point that looking at the profiles and the risk profiles of a lot of different industries based on the company size, some of those in one industry actually had more of a risk profile in common with someone in a completely different industry than with their own peers. So for example, very much smaller banks had more in common from a risk perspective with retailers than they did with larger banks. So that's another argument for mixing up the threat intelligence sharing and finding common cause with those whose profile more closely matches your own.
Go ahead.
Also depends on the size, because if we are talking about big corporations, and then it could be an issue effectively to exchange information. But talking about SMEs, for instance, there's no way to survive alone in this kind of environment where we are facing. So for SMEs, I think it's a must. So to exchange the maximum of information and the intelligence that they don't have inside. So
I think there's a very tangible and simple explanation to that really great point, which I, by the way, had not heard before, but it makes a lot of sense. And that is that the typical threat actor that we're talking about your company is not their goal. Their goal tends to be something like money or something beyond your company. And therefore, who you are, what widgets you sell isn't nearly as important as you being the next step on what they want, be it money, be it influence, be it a platform, be it whatever that is. And therefore, you're not so important, and what you do isn't so important. And that makes an awful lot of sense to me. And that actually, full circle, goes back to why threat intelligence becomes important. Understanding who your threat actors are, understanding what their motivations are, and being able to treat them separately becomes much more important.
Now, one area that I don't think as an industry, we're sharing enough intelligence about or with is academia. I think as an industry in security, we're very good at building silos, and perhaps that's part of the mentality. But I certainly see that, in academia, there are very important things going on that first then make their way into the military, at least in the United States. It takes a while, and then it trickles down into the financial services. And by the time it gets into the rest of the market, it is old news. So, Eduardo, I'd like to hear about your perspective.
I think that we, as academia, we don't have this question about sharing information. We are sharing information. We publish. There are research groups that are trying to build new protocols, new programs, new algorithms. They are all published. They are all for people to read them. So this intelligence is there for all the community. So and I see some light now compared to previous years. I think that people tend to understand now what is the importance of knowledge transfer between the academia and the industry, and I'm quite optimistic on that front. So. There are some very interesting developments in the academia. We've been talking about cloud security, about encrypting data in the cloud. So maybe some of you have heard about homomorphic cryptography, which will allow you to actually act on your data in an encrypted state. So you don't need to decrypt the data in order to do operations on that. And this is a very new promising research direction. There are companies that are investing on them. The universities are present. And this has a clear impact and will have a clear impact on the businesses, especially for cloud providers. And I hope that this new direction, for instance, will be adopted soon in products, but because we are still at a very, very early stage, but we'll probably make progress on that.
Okay, now let me ask the panel, what elements does an enterprise have to have in place in order to make use of threat intelligence? What are the basics you need to have before you should even think about getting threat intelligence?
I could start with the NAV, network analysis and visibility. So you have to have a clear understanding of the information flow across your company, to understand who is handling what kind of information. Okay, this is a basic capability. And then the capability to analyze all the external, internal connection. Right now, you know that there is no perimeter, and so you are all the time interchanging information with other provider, with your customer, with all your stakeholder. And so you have first to be able to understand this information flow, okay? Because from that comes all the threats. It's about this information flow.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to have your security basics right first. You have to have your sort of patching, firewall controls, your visibility, network monitoring all in place. You've got to have a situation where you have an intelligence provider that actually looks at the environments outside your infrastructure, because that will augment what you see, what your teams, security team are looking inside your organization in terms of infrastructure security monitoring. And then I think you have to also adopt a continuous a response mode of approach of dealing with problems and issues and risks. And I think that kind of makes a good way of dealing with modern threat landscape.
Eduardo, what do you think the enterprise needs before they should think about getting threat intelligence?
I totally agree with you. I think that all these controls are effective. They need to be put in place. And on that front, I would like also to comment that it's not that I think that we are winning the battle of protecting perimeters, but for instance, I've been there for 20 years. So when I started in my consulting, with my consulting hat, I was having hard time for configuring a firewall. So now it's something that we need how to do. It's effective, and normally it stops many threats that come from the outside. So it's not the same thing on the user side and on the client side. And this is where now our big challenge is. So if we take, for instance, all the different vulnerabilities that were related to banking attacks last year, most of them were at the client side. And this is something that we really need to focus now. We know how to protect our perimeter, even if the perimeter has blurred because of the cloud and so on. But I think that now our main risk is on our providers, supply chain and so on the client side. So it's...
I think the enterprise needs, I can boil it down fairly simply. Visibility, as we've discussed, you've got to understand what it is you have, what it is you want to protect. You have to have a good set of controls, because what is threat intelligence, particularly in the IT security space, other than something that's going to allow you to modify the way you control, to modify where your controls are pointed, how your controls function. But third, and the most important thing that an enterprise needs in order to, before it should be embarking on this, is talent. And I find this particular pursuit is one of the opportunities that our industry has of expanding past what we've been doing, past technologists, past people who really are good at making machines do better. It's bringing in data analytics. It's bringing in professions which we've never had exposure to, nor have we really had an ability to expand into. So talent is the third thing we need to have in place.
Just one thing, because I'm a little bit surprised about this conference and the last conference that I have attended. So there has been a shift on the messages that we are hearing. So for years, when I started to go to this kind of conference 10 years to 12 years ago, we are hearing about preventing attacks, avoiding attacks, and now we are not hearing about it. Okay, it will happen. So it's about how to minimize, how to reduce the risk, how to analyze, how to detect,
How to respond.
how to respond, exactly, how to assess the attack. And this actually brings me to a very important point that everybody's talking about, but nobody's actually doing it. So data classification. So if we know that we are going to be attacked, we need to know where to prevent to be attacked and so on. So know what you want to defend. So you will be attacked anyway. You need to know where are your big risks, where are your jewels, in order to protect them.
I guess I would add or emphasize one more thing, one more ingredient that needs to be there, and that's the ability and the willingness to take action based on that intelligence. Because if you're getting in, this intelligence and taking it someplace and saying, we have this vulnerability, we see that it's being exploited with our peers, we need to go fix this right now, and other people say, nah, we don't think it's that important, then the intelligence is not really helping you. So ability and capability and willingness to take action on that actionable information is another key.
In other words, to be relevant in your role to deliver intelligence to your executive or to the business. Many times we are doing works that then outside the department, outside the IT function, are not understood or are not useful for the other to take decision. So this is even important to communicate within the organization that there is an intelligence capability within the organization that can deliver information, valuable information to take decision. This is another layer within the company talking about information security governance. Okay, so what we can do with this information, with this intelligence to be actionable. For example, that the other person within the company can understand the value of this information and take decision based on this information.
Mm-hmm. And
this
let's not forget as well. I mean, I like the point. It's what we're really talking about is building credibility with the business. That when we say this one's important, that we're not Chicken Little, we're not crying about the sky is falling, that they actually respond. And I've built that credibility over 2 years, but the important flip side of that is using your intelligence to disprove things as well, to actually calm things down, the oil in the water, and that's an incredibly important credibility builder in the business. To be able to say, I won't give any specific examples, but big vulnerabilities which even got a brand name and a logo and everything, and saying, actually, this is not something we want you to worry about. This is not something we want you to jump about. Patch that in your regular patch cycle. We see one of my favorite phrases, we see no evidence of a campaign to exploit this vulnerability. And that is a great credibility builder and allows you to build that route into the business so they will act when you need them to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the important thing is that once you're able to bring in data and you're able to show the rigor of your analysis of it, and to be able to say, we don't have evidence of this, we do have evidence of that, I'll show you all of the argument, the strength of our argument. But yeah, never underestimate the power of being able to say to your management, this isn't that important, I don't think we need to worry about it.
Even though it has a logo.
Even though it has a logo, yeah, their jaws will drop. It's like, wow, the sky is not falling. So yeah, a very important part of your discussion is talking about what you're not going to worry about. Anybody have another comment, or we'll invite more questions from the audience. But we'll have a mic runner coming down here.
Here.
The second.
When you mentioned what actionable intelligence requires, it seems that it will be summarised under something that you've come across in other contexts: smart, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timeframes. I'm not sure if you had the time in there, so you need to receive it.
Yeah, timely information.
So just a way of drawing it together, really.
Yeah, I was just making that up as I went along, so well done. All right, another question over on this side, this gentleman.
Hi, how would you, have you got examples of how you've leveraged external information? I mean, because some of the details like what Gianluca has given us was saying the internal flows within the organization have to be well developed. But say if you don't have the external information, in my case, for my risk assessments, I would look at things like Marc's publication, the Financial Times. I would look at what's happening in the world, and they have pretty good surveys, which I'll try and pivot and explain what's happening in the business, as well as advisories like Secunia or CERT. But how do you actually integrate that? Have you got examples of how you've integrated, or best practice that you've seen elsewhere?
Okay, I can ask, yes.
Can you repeat the question for
Yes,
the audience?
well, how to understand the external threats, what are how to collect information about external threat, okay, from the open source, for example, Yes, first, I think that in our case, for example, we establish a process to understand before all the information flow internally. So, which are the business process and how they use the information to carry out the business operation, okay? Knowing this, you have to understand from where can came the threat, what kind of threat, to what kind of threat you are exposed, okay? To understand this, you have to understand your business. For example, we have operation in Saudi Arabia, in Algeria, in Egypt, so this kind of country have different threat, geopolitical threat than the other. We are talking about cybersecurity, but at the end, cybersecurity is just a way to deliver some kind of attack of threat, just it by computer. But the aim of this attack is to disrupt your business or to change you with the competitors. So you have to understand not just the technical layer, how they are carrying out this attack, but even why. So who is behind this attack? And so this is a different kind of intelligence, okay? And how to collect this? There are several technology right now that the process starts with understanding your business, okay? Understand your business, you have then to know your competitors in each region that are different, because we are exposed with market competitors different from Saudi Arabia that Brazil or Mexico, okay? There are some could be global company, but other are regional, buzz regional. So you understand your competitors in different markets, and then you start to collect information, okay, open source or closed source information about geopolitical risk, okay, what could happen in Egypt that could disrupt our operation. We are one of the biggest company that collect waste, for example, in Cairo area, and we have some competitor that come from different region to try to win some new contract there. And so we are always analyzing these new competitors and understand if really they are pushing to pull off us with this market, and how they can do this. They can do this not just with a cyber attack, but even with other way, in other way. And so this is the threat intelligence that you have to develop, okay, to understand which is your market, which is the difference between one area to the other area, collect information for the competitors. This is a complex process. It takes time. Okay, and probably you have to learn day by day, even with the mistake that you can do.
Okay, so we've got 5 minutes. I'd like to close by asking everyone on the panel to come up with their takeaway point, which we had originally talked. Now you have time to figure out what it was that you were going to say. So takeaway points for the audience for today. Mine is to focus on the people, not necessarily the technology when it comes to intelligence. If you're not sure where to start, find a reputable consulting firm that can help you do a vulnerability assessment and then a threat assessment on top of that for your enterprise to figure out what you should be worrying about, and based on your current level of capabilities, what you can do to augment that, where you should start. But start with the people. Gianluca?
My takeaway point are really, do you need intelligence? First question. Because it depends on the maturity level of your organization. Many times I talk with people that are developing intelligence that nobody will consume. So what are you doing? So it depends on the maturity of your organization. When you reach the level that you understand that your company, your organization is asking you for information to anticipate some kind of risk and take decision, so this is the time to develop capability on threat intelligence. Second point, this is not a short journey. This is a long journey because you need to develop capability within your organization. Probably you will need help from expert, and then you will need help to reach the executive level with this, hey, I'm here with this kind of information. Do you need it? Do you see that is valuable for your, if not, is waste your time and better focus on virus and the firewall.
Burim?
Yeah, I think my takeaway for this is get your security basics right. That's the first thing. The second is actually approach cyber intelligence, threat intelligence in a way that will augment your internal security infrastructure platform. So that it will give you a view as to what's happening in terms of your risk profile from outside. It will give you a view if there are things which relate to you, which are out there about you. And the third one is to basically get the people who will be able to consume those alerts, and fourth, adopt a continuous mode of response.
I think that being from the academia, I have no choice. So I agree with you. I focus on people. I totally agree. But do not underestimate technology. So phishing attacks, they need the user not to be security aware in order to click into the link and trigger an attack. This is clear. But a phishing mail that lands into the user mailbox is a technology failure also, because this mail shouldn't be there, by the way. So we should focus also on detecting these kind of emails, inspecting the content, and this is purely technology. And we know how to do it. But technology failures may actually be one of the reasons why this message lands into user mailbox, and it shouldn't be underestimated. This is a clear example.
I guess my takeaway has been taken away by a couple of the speakers now, right? But that's okay. My takeaway really would be, you must start with your people. You can create a threat intelligence capability or service for free. I spent a year and a half doing exactly that. But what's required in order to start to prove or to prove that the investment you made in people was correct and valid and had value is that build your use cases. What are you going to use that threat intelligence for? How are you going to leverage this information you made? What decisions are you going to improve? Now, I will tell you that if you are successful, you will quickly grow beyond those use cases. You will quickly be getting information which you didn't even know that you would be getting at first, as I'm now. And you'll be able to having to think on the fly and act on the fly and respond. But start from those use cases so that you can prove value immediately, so you can guarantee your investment. Okay, fantastic. Thank you to the great questioners in our audience, and thank you to our panel, and have a great afternoon.